Hey there, this is the second installment of a series that I'm doing where I'm going and touring other facilities that work with disadvantaged populations. The first time we went over to the Tulsa Dream Center. This last time, what you're about to see is the Lighthouse Outreach Center over in Bartlesville. It's a homeless shelter that helps people deal with addiction and the problems of generational and systemic poverty. I went on a tour there, and then on a later day, I was able to sit down and do an interview with the director, Mr. Errol Hada. Really enjoyed both of these things. I learned a lot, time very well spent. Even if you're not a part of this project of helping this church discern how it is that we're called to care for the local poor, it's just interesting stuff to know. A lot of people don't know about Lighthouse and what it does, or they know generally vaguely what it does, but this is an inside look at not just the people that are in there, not just the staff and workers, not just the facilities, but how it all fits together and how they do this work together. So I hope you enjoy this segment that we do, and just skip through and see what appeals to you and may be a blessing to you. Well, I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Glad to do it.
Yeah, you have a pretty good understanding of what we're looking at already. You and I have spoken during the tour we did a couple weeks ago. And it's a wonderful situation we're in, but I'm very intimidated at the notion of starting something new. I figured it might be helpful to start off just with the broad strokes history of this place. I was in worship with you here a few minutes ago, and you were talking about the history of a Naomi that started this. And so I'm interested to know about the roots of it, what started it, and then where you came in and how long you've been with the organization.
Naomi started it 30 years ago, and she was director for about 22 years. And then her health began to affect her, and so she approached the board with the resignation of not being able to continue the work. And so the board began looking for another director. And I was on the board at the time. I've been on the board for about 10 years, off and on. And first became involved in the Lighthouse in about 25, 26, maybe 27 years ago. Our church would provide a meal once a month, and then I would do a sermon for chapel once a month. And so that's how we got started doing it. I've been doing that as a volunteer for about 20-some years, more than 20 years. And then they asked me to be on the board. I was on the board for about 10 years. And then while I was on the board this last time, they when they were needing a director, we went down to John 3:16 in Tulsa, and I asked Steve Whitaker, the director there, if they might have somebody on staff that could come up and serve as interim director until we decide what we're going to do for sure. He said, yeah, we might have. He said, but usually a board looks within the board themselves, see there might be somebody there. And I'd already told the Lord I would be director if the board asked me, but I wasn't going to volunteer. That was my sign to know I was supposed to do it. And a board member was there with me, and she said, Errol, what about you? And I knew immediately that was what God was saying. And the hair on my arm stood up, and I just knew that was the call right there that I needed. And I needed that because when things get rough, you need to go back to that time to make sure you're right where God wants you to be. So Naomi started with very limited resources. This building used to be a transmission shop, and the upstairs was apartments, and so that part was conducive to what we were doing. And so when we first started, they began remodeling the bottom part, and then they do a room at a time upstairs until they finally, when I became director, it had been going for 22, 23 years, and we still had one room that wasn't finished upstairs yet. So while I was director, we finished the last room upstairs. So it's been a long, slow process. And then about 15 years ago, they built the men's dorm, which houses now 34 men, and that was a big game changer for the Lighthouse to increase our ability to help more people. And we've been close to full the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe have 1 or 2 beds and then be filled, and then have somebody move out and have vacancies there. So it's been up and down. And like I said in chapel, there's some really a difficult time financially for the Lighthouse at times. And anytime you're doing God's work, you're going to run into obstacles because the enemy doesn't want you to do it. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
if you know that's what God wants you to do, then you can just keep plowing ahead and trusting God and seeking His direction. And if you do need to make a course correction, you can do that, and with God's direction there.
So Naomi was director for 22 years,
Approximately that, yes.
and then the organization's been here 30 years.
30,
So
yeah.
you've been
It's my 8th year, so she's
Okay.
here 23 years, and then I've been there 8 years now.
Great. and the Lord called you to it, and it's been a blessing ever since. The hard financial times you talked about, was that while you've been director, or was that before?
Before. We had some difficult time when I first became director, but it's the community support has been really built up again, and there was some time when the community support sort of wavered, but those are things that have been taken care of. The No Idea tours have really helped with the community support.
And that's what I came on.
Yeah,
okay.
And that really began to show people what's really going on here. So.
Yeah. And you've got a number of churches and local donors and stuff that just give regularly.
Right. I spoke at Blackwell yesterday at a Christian church in Blackwell, and they have us on their monthly budget. Once a month they send us a check to support us. And then I went over and spoke to them about the Lighthouse and took a resident with me, and he gave his testimony. And so I do those things at churches that would like to become involved. So I'm speaking at the Lions Club this Thursday evening about the Lighthouse. So I get those opportunities, and those are good chances I usually take a resident with me to give their testimony and then to give a little bit more information about the Lighthouse. So.
Well, so far as, I'll tell you a little bit about what I've wanted to do for No Wada, and all of it I need to hold lightly, because the Lord is, you make plans and God laughs, or whatever the saying is. But what I've kind of imagined is we already have a good deal of land on which to build something new. And I've known that a lot of people coming out of a dysfunctional, difficult way of life need a different place to be, away from all their surroundings that brought out the worst in them. They need a place that's safe. They need a place that's holy, and a place that's structured. And that's what I'm just really impressed with what you guys do here. There's a lot of great structure, and I want to learn a lot more. I've imagined building kind of a little network of cottages around a common building that are just one room miniature homes, where they have their own private space, but then they're expected to be in the common facility doing structured daily activities, including a good deal of worship and Bible study. And so I very much like the model you have here, that's Christ first. The priority is Christ, and if you're not offering them Christ, you're really just offering a Band-Aid for a bullet wound. And then I really like, financial training, financial literacy, the employment training to be a good employee. And then I just think studying the Bible is just really helpful for restoring lives, and that's where I really want to focus it all. I have a church that we have a budget that's not huge, but we have enough to talk seriously about starting something like this up. I have no doubt we could get a foundation support. We have a couple benevolent organizations that I think would give grants or at least 0% interest loans. So I think the hardest part is going to be getting, there are people that are not against it, but getting people that are for it to sit on the board, to do the daily work. I can do daily work, but actually being on hand all day, every day, I'm thinking there probably needs to be another person for that. So do you have any advice so far as first steps, finding your people, anything around putting meat on those bones?
I think coming up with your rules and what your first of all, what's your target? There are people that don't come to the Lighthouse and don't want to come here, or have been here and can't come back, or don't want to come back because we have a no drug policy.
Right.
And so those people are out there wandering the streets, sleeping in tents, sleeping under bridges and vacant houses and sheds and stuff like that. And people ask me, do we go out and hunt these people up? We don't. That's not our calling. Our calling is to minister to people that come here that want help. There is a need for people to go out and try to minister to those people, but that's not us. And so you need to decide. You can't. I don't think you can do both. I think you get distracted. So you got to decide: are you going to be this a place where they begin to rebuild their lives, or a place to try to keep them alive until they do decide to get their life turned around? And so you got to decide what your main focus is going to be. Is it going to be recovery and rebuilding their lives to become productive citizens, or is it to be more of a emergency care and something like that, just a ER type facility?
And yours is definitely not just keeping them alive. Yours
Yeah.
is helping them build their lives back together.
Yeah.
And let's remember where we were in this, but if briefly, do you have a sense in Bartlesville how many organizations are just trying to keep them alive versus how many are really trying to help people restore their lives?
The majority are giving them food, clothes,
Yeah.
and things like that.
That's just keeping them alive.
And maybe even medical care, you know. And we use those resources. There's
Sure.
we use the free health clinics here in town to help our people but our goal is to help them spiritually and change their life, not just to help them get healthy, you know.
Yes. Okay. So back on track, we were talking about starting principles, and so first off, you lined off. You need to be clear about what you do and what you don't do because you can't do it all. Yeah. Okay.
Like at one time, we used to feed outside guests here, and then Agape Mission opened up, and their ministry is feeding people that don't have any meals, and so I decided there's no need for us to duplicate their services.
Right.
They can go over there and get their meal, because what they were doing, they were deciding which menu they wanted that day, you know. And, and our people, some of our people were going over there. I said, you don't need to be going anywhere for your meals. You got them right here.
Right. Yeah.
And so we cut out the outside guests. And another, besides the fact of the duplication of services, another thing was we had people that were kicked out of here for using drugs, and then they could come back for a free meal, and they sat next to people they were doing drugs with, or that used to be their dealer, and so it was very difficult for our people to be able to move away from that old environment you're talking about, because we let it come right back in here. So it sounds harsh. So we have closed chapel services only to guests and regular residents. Once in a while, we'll make an exception if there's a baptism like that, a special event. You know, we'll let people come in, but typically. And that sounds harsh, but if they're coming just to connect to the people again that they were doing drugs with, it's a trigger to these people that are trying to get their lives. So we have to. I'm pretty protective of the people at the Lighthouse, because it's my responsibility to protect them from their old environment and to help them get strong enough. So eventually they can. They're going to have to go back into that eventually. But our goal is to make them strong enough to be able to do that before they leave here.
Yeah. So, do you guys, is it all private funding, or do you get any funding from, say, Medicare or something for?
We don't get any government funding at this point, other than we did get $40,000 from the government for the crisis payroll protection plan.
Yeah.
And there was no strings attached whatsoever. But we'd get a $40,000 grant anytime we want it from the government to help us, but we'd have to not have required chapel.
Right.
And they try to work with it because they want to give it to us. They want to help us out. But so they try to how we could reword it, you know, and it's still going to be not requiring chapel. And that's a very core part of our ministry. Yeah. And we've had people saved because they had to come to required chapel. Like I say in the chapel day, you come until you like it, and then you start liking it, and then it's good. And one guy was an atheist when he came to the Lighthouse, and it took 180 chapels. He figured out later to get saved. Well, if we hadn't required chapel, would you come? He said no.
Right.
So right there, you know, that may sound like we're being arbitrary or dictatorial, whatever. It's what people need, you know. It's just like a parent telling your kid, you need to eat this because it's good for you.
Yeah, it's the basic theological question is, what is the nature of love? Does love require things of you, or does it just give unconditionally? And it's hard because Jesus died for us unconditionally, but his blood is applied to us conditionally. Yeah. You know, so it's very difficult to say, you know, yes, we love you unconditionally, we want the good for you, but we're going to require you to do things that you don't want to do.
And you don't have to be a Christian to come here. You don't have to become a Christian while you are here.
Right.
And you don't have to come with a clean drug record. We test everybody that comes in. If you test positive for drugs, we let you come in, and then we'll test you later on to make sure they're out of your system. But we don't say you've got to be all these things when you come here. And our goal is the goal is for you to become a Christian. But again, we're not going to kick you out because you're not a Christian.
Right.
We're not going. And one person one time made a comment that about doing something, and the resident said, "Well, that's not very Christian." He said, "Well, I'm not a Christian." He said. Then she said, "Well, that explains your behavior then." But you know, we put it in front of them. And I believe, in required chapels, I have responsibility to have good chapels. You know, I'm selective who I let come in and speak. Because we've had some people come to do chapels, and I said we'd say we're not going to let them come back because they were either demeaning to our people, or else they were going off in directions that were way far outside of the basic Christian standard of beliefs, and so, or they were one of them his chapel lasts about an hour and a half, and he came an hour late the first place,
Oh my
and
goodness.
so it was just irresponsible, the whole
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
And so you got to be sensitive to the crowd, you got to read the room, because these people aren't used to sitting for more than 20, 30 minutes, and so
Right.
we allow an hour for chapel, but I very seldom take that long, because I know they're going to be done listening before I'm done preaching if I
Right.
don't. So,
Yeah.
but I feel very responsible to have spirit-led speakers in the chapel services.
Well, I want to follow up on the finding good leadership. My understanding of your organization is it started with a strong leader, Naomi.
Yes.
And then Naomi had a network of relationships already built up that she built up the group that became the board initially, and worked on site and got the funding together. That's the part that I'm anxious about, because as I have these conversations with people, everybody's on board with, yes, we need to help the poor. We need to do something that works. We can't just be throwing money out the way that we are. But getting the people on board who share the vision, who are willing to sacrifice the time and the energy, is there any art to that, or is it all just God giving you people when it's time, or what do you
It
think?
might be, you might want to have a meeting, open meeting
Yeah.
in Nevada, and say we're looking at developing a ministry, and open to the public to come just hear people's view and share your vision. And then from that, it'd probably be a small group to start off with, but from that, one or two people might come up with, I'd like to be involved in that. That sounds like something. And so it could be maybe someone from the police department, that sees the need to do more, or that would want to be a board member, or somebody that has somebody that's in a recovery program themselves, or maybe a recovering addict or something like that. But I think maybe just share the vision with the people. Now, I think you're thinking about being done by your church.
Yeah.
The advantages are you have more control over it, and you can guide it the way you want it to go. The limitations are you don't have as much community-wide support. Some people will give to a church's ministry, even though they're outside that church, because they believe in it. We're blessed because we're ecumenical, and we have all kinds of churches and denominations supporting us. Our board is made up of about 5 different churches. There's about 3 Wesleyans on the board. There's a person who goes to Happy Hill Church, one that goes to Life Church in Owasso, pastor of Truth Tabernacle, and a member of his from Truth Tabernacle. So we have a pretty good array of different churches involved, and I think that helps. And there are churches that have ministries like the Exodus House, the Methodist Church has. Those are pretty much funded by the Methodist Church and overseen by the Methodist Church, and they're effective.
Yeah.
And so,
But you're pessimistic about if one church was the primary entity putting it all together. You're pessimistic about other churches or benevolent entities wanting to give to the church for that ministry, because what if it seems more realistic to form a separate 501c3 that is then intentionally ecumenical. So I guess I need to explore that more. Are there ways in which it being ecumenical has presented challenges where it wouldn't have been a challenge just for it to be a church?
well, we have a statement of faith, which is basically the Apostles' Creed. So we go by that, So we've not had any real problems with that. I've had some speakers that I've had to exclude because they got on, like I said, on the outside the boundaries there in their presentations. But we've not had a problem with that. But it could be in some places. Especially if you've got somebody that's a really strong person, maybe in the community, a really strong personality, but they don't share the Christian belief. We've had people on our board, I believe, at one time that weren't Christians. They were church people, but they weren't Christians.
Yeah.
And if the board's not committed, strong, practicing Christians, you can go drift away from your original mission, or become succumb to the pressure. Well, let's go ahead and take some government money. We'll minimize our spiritual influence. We'll try to do it behind the scenes.
Right.
And
that's the thing I'm really concerned about, is maintaining the standard of Christ, and it would be very difficult to maintain that standard without being accused of being heavy-handed.
Yeah.
So does the board give you authority to hire and fire and
Yes.
decide? Okay, so you don't have to run that by them. They don't have to. Okay.
Only thing would be like an assistant director or somebody like that that's got a leadership position. The director of development, I brought that for because it was additional money, and also that person represents the Lighthouse throughout the community. So
Yeah, yeah. The concern I've had on the front end is starting it off on grounds that couldn't be maintained, and if we're too spread out among too many different conflicting ideologies, like just the fact that you're able to get your board together around Christ comes first, everything else comes second. I mean, that's really hard for a lot of churches, who give out money but don't require people to engage in the community.
And part of something that you might want to do is, since it's going to be on church property, the buildings and that become the churches, regardless if the program continues or not. And then the maintenance and the operation and the salaries and that come through the organization.
Right.
You might want to do that where it's almost like they lease the property for $1 a year or something like that, just to maintain it still your property, because you wouldn't want to invest this from your church and the land you already have and stuff like that, and then something go awry and the board decides they want to pull away from the church or whatever, and what do you do with the property then? So I mean, you may need to do something to protect your church's interest in the property.
So yeah, there are a lot of differences between what we're positioned to do and what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
You are a pastoral presence, but you're not a pastor of a local church.
Right.
I would be the pastor of the
preacher.
local church, and then what role I would play. I kind of like the idea of just being general oversight instead of there being a board oversight, just having the primary. I mean, I think it would be a one-man operation in the beginning, just being present with 12 or so men.
And you might want to start off with the church board overseeing it
that
as a ministry of the church.
Yeah.
And then even if it became an ecumenical ministry, the board could oversee that. And then as it grew to this point, a local church board could not do what our church board, our Lighthouse board does now, because it's too big. And we're almost $500,000 this year in income, and it's about $53,000 more than last year.
Good for you.
So
That's wonderful.
When it was about 200 and some when I first became director here. And so it's grown, and I give God the credit for that. I mean, like I said in the chapel, God did that. And back to being dictatorial, you'll be accused of that.
Yeah.
No matter what, if you maintain a standard, you're going to be accused of being narrow-minded or unloving, or I thought this was a Christian organization. I get that thrown at me every once in a while when I make a decision that is based on our standards and based on God's word.
Yeah. And for most people, when they say that, they just mean you're not being nice, because they think being a Christian is being
you
nice.
didn't get my way. I didn't get my way is what that means. Yeah.
So is your response to that generally just lackluster? How do you respond to those kind of accusations?
I pretty much just let it go.
Yeah.
Because there's no way I'm going to be able to defend it and change their mind.
Yeah.
They're angry. I've had people get mad and when they left here and cuss and spin their tires and head out. And one lady, she left that way, and she got mad at me because she was here and she wanted her daughter to come here too, to help her daughter get off drugs. And I flat out asked her, I said, do you want to come here? And she said, no. I said, well, then we can't have you then if you don't want to come. And the mother got mad at me because they didn't want the daughter to come here, not wanting to come. Well, it's going to be disastrous if she was here not wanting to be here. And so, but then about 6 months later, I got a card from her, and she said, I want to apologize for the headache and the heartache I caused you, and sent us a money order with a donation. She sent several money orders over the years.
Wonderful.
And so there's been a change there.
Yeah.
But I mean, nothing I could have said could have made it any better. She had to go through this herself and work on it, God work in her. So
yeah. And similar stuff in the church. I've been a pastor for 11 years, and there have been ladies who got mad at me that I wouldn't baptize their grandchild, but their grandchild didn't want to get baptized.
Yeah.
So same thing.
Yeah.
You can't just
Yeah.
force it.
You just got to maintain your what you believe God wants you to do, what the Bible says, and do it in as gentle a way as you can. But you're going to be firm sometimes too.
Yeah. See, and the firmness comes a lot more easy to me than the gentleness.
Yeah.
So I know that that's where God is going to continue to. He's already rounded me out some, but there's a lot more to be done. And I know doing this kind of work, this is where the rubber hits the road with faith. It's real easy to talk about and think about being a Christian when you don't know any messy people that really try your faith. But I wonder if over time, has that gotten easier for you as you've done this kind of work, where you've just built up some spiritual muscle tissue that you can rely on, or do you find yourself consistently?
You have to have thick skin and a tender heart. and there are times when you could become callous if you're not careful, and not see people as an individual, but just as a problem or a person as an addict or whatever. So you got to be sensitive to that and be open to the fact that you could get jaded if you're not careful. And then the other extreme is you can give in to everybody and hear the little sob story, and sometimes they have a sad story that's true, but still doesn't change the circumstances of what you need to do.
Right.
We don't take sex offenders because we have children here, so that's one group of people we can't take.
Right.
Well, my heart goes out to them because there's very few places they can go.
Right.
There is a ministry in Oklahoma City called Hand Up Ministry that we refer them to, but it's big and it's way away from here, and I have not had much involvement other than I've taken a few people down there.
Yeah.
But we can't. It's something that's unfortunate the way we do things, but with kids we just have to protect them. So
it's a frustration. You can't take care of everybody. You know, in the kingdom, everybody will be taken care of, but until then,
we're a non-narcotic facility, so if they're on narcotics, they can't come. And we include methadone, which is a treatment for heroin, which is, in my opinion, a poor way to do it.
Yes.
Because this is addictive and has side effects on it too, and people try to take methadone illegally just because they want it because of the side effects for that too. So, there's been things in the news about, how some sober living houses won't do that. How are you helping people if you don't do that? Well, you're not helping people if they're still there under a drug effect. So we don't allow medical marijuana either.
Yeah.
And that if we don't
That's
take
really
a stand,
going against
if
the
we
culture
don't take
too.
a stand on that right now, it's not fair for somebody to get high from marijuana with a card and somebody get high from marijuana and get kicked out because they don't have a card.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I know it's not easy. Your time is valuable. You got to go in 5 minutes. Is there any closing wisdom that you think is just really important to offer me and anyone else who comes on board to this project?
Well, the staff is important because they're my eyes and ears. And we have resident staff. Most of our staff live here. Most of them have been addicts and alcoholics before, so they can see the signs before you even have to do a test. If they'll suggest we test somebody, usually they're right. That person is doing something. And if you don't test periodically, randomly and with surprise, and then some routine times, they'll sneak by. Because we do what I call an all skate. We test everybody, and because there's somebody out, we're suspecting that somebody's doing it or other people are doing it. And a lot of times the people we thought were doing it weren't, but the people that we didn't suspect were doing it. And so it usually surprises either way. But you got to do that, and that helps keep them on their toes, and then realize you can.
How many? What percentage of people who come in have to leave because they've tested positive? If you had to estimate,
I would say probably 20%, or not a whole lot. Yeah.
Well, 1 out of 5 is significant. I mean, it's hard when you say on the front end, if you do any, you're out.
And what's really hard though, when it's a staff member, and I've had that happen before.
Yeah.
And
so staff gets tested too.
Yes, because sometimes they're the one that they have more access to drugs because they're more free in their movements than others sometimes.
One of the practical things I'm wondering about staff is surely you're not able to pay them an hourly wage or a salary.
No, most of our staff gets $7,500 to $200 a week, which is, but if they weren't living here, they couldn't afford to. And then some of them, they may decide they need to get another job to be able to do more. They range from $75 a week to $300 for like a cook or somebody that's got more responsibility and more work involved. But we don't pay them much. And
do they all live on site?
All those who make those kind of salaries, yeah.
Okay. And there's not legal issues around that?
No, what we do, we have them sign a form that they are paid for. We figure minimum wage, divide that into their salaries, so they're paid for like 28 hours, and they donate the other 12. And they sign a form saying that, so that it's a donation of the other hours they're paying.
Okay.
They're not getting paid for.
Okay.
Because if we paid everybody minimum wage, we couldn't afford to keep going.
Yeah, that's.
And some ministries do not hire residents for those kind of the reasons of, well, they're coming out of their own problems. And sometimes they're just a step or two ahead of the people they're trying to watch.
Yeah.
And so there's that danger. Sometimes they get the power goes to their head, and they become bullies about their position. They've got a badge, they can do this and that, and they sort of flaunt it in front of the people. But some people, it's the thing that they need to start back into getting some self-esteem back. And I've had people tell me that when I hired them for that little bit of money, it really meant a lot to them to feel like somebody believed in them again.
Yeah.
And so there's the advantages there, the financial advantages there, but then the difficulty, you don't have people that are really trained, and they may be going through their own issues, and they got to deal with somebody that's unreasonable or somebody that's been rude to them or mean to them or something like that. So it's hard to separate. But I think in the overall, the advantages for us outweigh the disadvantages.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, you've certainly taken advantage of the way things are and leveraged them to the way that they need to be.
And I think that the daily staff meetings is very good for them.
I'm so glad you had me come to that.
Where they
this
pray
morning.
for each, and they pray for residents they've had to kick out. And
yeah.
the people don't know that. The residents now, they don't realize that a lot of times.
Yeah.
When I first came here, the staff meeting was standing around this counter here and just talking about things of the day, without getting any depth, and then they have one group prayer. But when they moved it into there, so it's more private.
Sure.
Because we got to talk about things, and they're told everything we say in there is confidential, and they're not to share it anywhere else, and that's something we hold them to. And violation of that confidence can be a reason for termination. They do know that. So
good. Well, I know you have a doctor's appointment to get to, and I really appreciate you making the time, and I'll find a way to bug you when I have questions that's not quite so invasive, but I think it was great to sit down like this.
And if you would want me to go to your informational meeting, if you decide that's the route you want to go, you might want to within the church do a little church meeting first, to see see if the church is on board with this, because it's messy.
Yeah.
And you'll have things happen that some people in the church might not like, and so you got to be prepared for that and aware that may take place. In the Bible, it says that there's an empty stable is easy to keep clean, but there's no income from empty stable. Yeah. To me, that says a church can keep their building nice and clean with no scratches, no dings, and no wear on it, but there's no profit. You're not doing any good. And I think a church should be worn out, taken care of, but still used enough that it's helping people come to the kingdom of God.
Yeah. When we're talking about the profit, we're not talking about money. We're talking about bearing fruit for our
beneficial.
Our
Yeah.
Well, you guys are certainly bearing fruit here. I'm just so impressed and blessed to be here. So thank you so much, Mr. Hada. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
All right. So we filmed the tour and we filmed the interview separately. We may or may not put them together, but I just thought it would be good to have a couple closing notes. I was really impressed with what I saw over at Lighthouse. It's been there for 30 years in downtown Bartlesville, getting by on a hope and a prayer. It's clear that they've had some struggles and some hard times, and of course nobody wants that. But a lot of organizations start with good intentions, and then they crater under those pressures. And Lighthouse, under the leadership of Errol, and it sounds like Naomi, who came before him, and Errol is going to be retiring, and I think they know who his replacement's going to be. Anyway, it's a very impressive thing that they've done. I was very encouraged to see how an organization is able to stay so faithful. I went to the chapel service and sat for the staff meeting. Just all throughout, Christ is glorified throughout all of it. They're doing quality work with integrity. Like I said, I think before the tour, I knew a couple people that have gone through the program there, just powerfully affected. It's made a big impact on a lot of lives. And, there's a lot to be sad about. There are a lot of people who go through the program there and are not powerfully affected, but it's not the fault of the people who are there. A lot of people, they don't like looking at these problems. They don't like dealing with these problems. It's hard to get money together for them. It's hard to get much volunteer support. But Lighthouse seems to have done a really, really good job using the resources at their disposal. I went on the tour of the facility with Greg Tiener over at First United Methodist Church, Bartlesville, and it became known during the tour that his church is actively supporting Lighthouse financially. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do, and I think it'd be great for other local churches to just be regularly giving to this ministry or others like it, because they do vital work that comes back on the local church, but oftentimes the local church doesn't have the muscle or the resources to really engage people who are dealing with these issues. A lot of times they need a place to go. They need to be separated from their surroundings and even the people that they're with. And so we would be wise to continue supporting groups that do this. And there is a particular, I didn't talk about this with Errol, I wish I had, the faith-based angle is so essential. Faith-based programs are routinely shown to be much more effective than programs that don't integrate faith and require people to engage spiritually. So, it's work that the government doesn't fund. It's work that the church really needs to be behind. And so often the church neglects supporting ministries like this. And I don't know why, but I sure am grateful for those churches that do support. So God bless Lighthouse. God bless Errol Hada and the work that he's and his staff are doing over there. And let's just be in prayer for people who are in Lighthouse, who have been humbled and are doing the hard work of getting their lives back together. And just pray that they see more and more success. So thanks for joining me for this time. I hope you were encouraged as I was. God bless you.